Happy Sabbath, everybody. My wife isn't here with me today. She's sick. She was home with a child that was sick last week, and now she's not here today because she's sick. We're just not able to kind of fight off these sicknesses. I'm going to jump right in with Scripture. I'm going to read Luke 17, verse 22. Then he, this being Jesus Christ, said to the disciples, "The days will come when you will desire to see one of the days of the Son of Man, and you will not see it. And they will say to you, 'Look here,' or 'Look there.' Do not go after them or follow them, for as the lightning that flashes out of one part under heaven shines to the other part under heaven, so also the Son of Man will be in his day. But first he must suffer many things and be rejected by this generation. And as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be also in the days of the Son of Man. They ate, they drank, they married wives, they were given in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, and the flood came and destroyed them all." So today I'm going to take a deeper look into what Jesus is saying here. And we're going to look closer at these days of Noah that he's talking about. And we're going to kind of compare them with end-time events. And Mr. Martin kind of touched on this last week in his sermon when he was talking about the readiness of and not being asleep for these end times. And what we see is that people were just kind of living their normal lives in the days of Noah. They were eating, they were drinking, they were marrying, and then the destruction came, and it came quick. They were not aware of the wickedness that was taking place within their society. There is the obvious correlation between these two events that the flood affected the world. It was on a worldwide scale. And what we see in Revelation is that, again, that's going to affect everybody. It's going to be, again, at a worldwide scale. There's not a ton of details about the days of Noah, but I think as we look at it today, you're going to realize that there are more details than maybe you think. But before we turn there, I'm actually going to bring this up. Easier to manage. We're going to talk about another pre-flood figure that Jesus again discusses in Luke 11, verse 49. "Therefore the wisdom of God also said, I will send them prophets and apostles, and some of them they will kill and persecute, that the blood of all the prophets which was shed from the foundation of the world may be required of this generation, from the blood of Abel to the blood of Zechariah, who perished between the altar and the temple. Yes, I say to you, it shall be required of this generation." So Jesus talks about the killing of these apostles and these prophets. And the first one he mentions is Abel, as the first one killed as a prophet. And we often don't think of Abel as a prophet. It's almost Jesus is telling us a little bit of extra about that story when he tells us that. I think that this time period of Abel, or these events of Abel and Noah, the events probably occurred probably over 1,500 years apart, but they're still very much connected. And to be honest, they're only 2 chapters apart in the Bible. The title of my sermon today is God Sees, God Separates, and God Saves. And we're going to look at this from the perspective of in the days of Noah. In Mike's Bible study, on the last day of unleavened bread, he compared Exodus and Matthew, and he said something that I'm jumping on here, kind of springboarding here from, that many of these Bible stories repeat again and again in their structure and in how everything plays out. And we see this pattern of God seeing, God separating, and God saving throughout Scripture. We see it very first in the flood. We can see it with some of the patriarchs. We can see it in the Exodus story. We can see it with David. And we can see it in the end time events. I'm going to start by talking about genealogy, because to be honest, that's about half of what you get in between the story of the Garden of Eden and the flood. And I'm going to open it up to the children to maybe answer some questions from this chart. Can any of the children see who was the oldest man on this chart? I heard that. Shout it out. Methuselah, yes. And how old did he live to be? Shout it out. Well, I kind of have it on the chart. You could read it on the chart. If you could read the chart. Hey, 969 years of age he lived to be. And the amazing part about when you kind of put all the ages on a chart like this is a lot of these guys lived to be pretty old. Methuselah was not an anomaly. To be honest, 7 of these 10 people listed lived to be over 900 years old. The shortest lifespan was Enoch. He's that low kind of bar there. And Enoch, we know, it doesn't really say he died. It said that he walked with God and never explicitly states his death. So to be honest, Lamech is the big anomaly on here in that he died in his 700s. We're going to move to another chart. So you can actually see when the flood occurred since the time of creation. Can any of the kids give me the year since creation that the flood occurred based on this chart? Can you tell? Can you read it? Yeah, so 1656, the flood occurred. And you can tell this because Genesis 5 lays it out. This person lived to be so long, and then he had this kid, and then he lived so many more years. So that's how we know, that's how you can kind of piece together when each of these individuals lived in this pre-flood time period. The amazing thing to me is the first generation that was born after the death of Adam was Noah. All the other generations before would have been able to meet and talk to Adam. And in these first 2,000 years, there were only 156 years which either Noah or Adam wasn't alive. It's just hard to fathom people living that long. And these long lives, we learn, was a problem during that time. We'll talk about that a little later. Last chart. We've got the genealogies of Cain and Seth. Oddly, the genealogy of Cain is kind of laid out for us. And there may be a gap within it in that there are quite a few more generations listed in Seth, but you can see that the names kind of line up with these genealogies. And we don't know exactly why that would have occurred, but it's definitely striking as you read it. You could conjecture that maybe these were royal lines that were somehow competing against each other, or perhaps there was some generational thing that caused them to name their kids such and such a name. But it's very striking to me, that these names line up so closely. Now we're going to read the story of Cain and Abel. Now Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, and said, I have acquired a man from the Lord. Then she bore again, this time his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. And in the process of time it came to pass that Cain brought an offering of the fruit of the ground to the Lord. Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat. And the Lord respected Abel and his offering, but he did not respect Cain and his offering. And Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. So the Lord said to Cain, Why are you angry? And why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door, and its desire is for you, but you should rule over it. Now Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel and his brother, and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, Where is Abel your brother? He said, I do not know. He was lying. Am I my brother's keeper? And he, this being God, said, What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. So now you are cursed from the earth, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you till the ground, it shall no longer yield its strength to you. A fugitive and a vagabond you shall be on the earth. And Cain said to the Lord, My punishment is greater than I can bear. Surely you have driven me out this day from the face of the ground. I shall be hidden from your face. I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond on the earth. And it will happen that anyone who finds me will kill me. And the Lord said to him, Therefore, whoever kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark on Cain, lest anyone find him should kill him. So Cain and Abel, key takeaways. God saw. He took notice of both the offerings of Cain and Abel. God separated. He made a distinction between these offerings. It says that the Lord respected Abel's offering, but he did not respect Cain's offering. And God, in this case, did not save. God tried to persuade Cain to change, but ultimately he let Cain make a choice. And Cain chose sin. Oops. So I have two questions. We'll deal with this first question. Why was Cain so afraid of other people if there were only just a few like Adam, Eve, and him on earth? So that's a question that kind of sticks out to me as I read this. Another question. What made Cain so angry that his offering was not accepted? So we'll deal with both these questions. And to deal with them, you first have to kind of try to figure out when Abel was murdered. You can't come to an exact figure, but you can come to an idea of when he might have been murdered looking at Scripture. So in Genesis 4, verse 25, it says, Adam had sexual relations with his wife again, and she gave birth to another son. She named him Seth, for she said, God has granted me another son in the place of Abel, whom Cain killed. So we know that Seth came he at least came after Abel had died. And it's likely that it was still fresh in that they still had heartache from Abel's death, that they would probably name their next kid such a name. So Seth means substitute. And here it says that Adam lived 130 years and begot a son in his own likeness after his image and named him Seth. And after he begot Seth, the days of Adam were 800 years, and he had sons and daughters. So he had many sons and daughters, and he would have had Seth around when he was 130 years old. So there would have been probably about 100, maybe 20 years. You don't know exactly, that people could have been multiplying on earth at this time. And this would make sense that there were many people on earth. There could have been hundreds or thousands, depending on how fast they multiplied. There were kind of two factors that were maybe limiting factors in how fast they multiplied, in that one was how old they were when they had kids. They were much older, but also they lived to be much longer, and ultimately you would think that they would have been able to reproduce during those times. So they kind of maybe offset each other. It's hard to know exactly how fast they would have multiplied, but 120 years could have been easily 100 or hundreds or thousands of people. And this would line up with Cain being afraid, and this would also line up with Abel being a prophet. Right? Who's he speaking to? He's speaking to other people. Okay. Oops. So, didn't do those right. So why was Cain so mad? If you look at Genesis 10 and what was going on immediately after the flood, maybe you have kind of a sense of what was going on at this time period. Because immediately after the flood, you've got these lists of Shem's kids and Ham's kids and Japheth's kids. And all these kids became nations. So you would think the same thing would have been happening kind of with Adam's kids. That kind of, there were power struggles early on. And maybe this was part of the reason why Cain was so mad, because God's favor meant political advantage within these power struggles. And perhaps why, he didn't seem to really take what God told him, his advice, a direct advice from God, as being anything meaningful. So it seems as if there's something deeper going on here with Cain. So now we're going to the story of Abel is a sad story, but there is a lesson in the story of Abel. And we get that lesson in Hebrews 11, verse 4. This is kind of the faith chapter, the Hall of Fame of Faith. It says that by faith Abel offered to God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, through which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts, and through it, he being dead still speaks. So, when Abel died, his righteousness still lived on. And that's kind of the lesson of Abel. Our righteousness does not die with us. The things that we do in this life still matter. And it lives on, and it can speak to others that are living. Just like how Abel's life, some 6,000 years later, still can speak to us. We're going to shift to the world of Noah. Just 2 chapters ahead. Genesis 6, verse 11. The earth was also corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. So God looked upon the earth, and indeed it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on earth. So why was the world so corrupt at this time? I think there is strong evidence that there was tyranny happening and there was spiritual deception. And we'll go through each of those right now. So let's read the story of Lamech. It's kind of a random character in the Bible. In Genesis 4, verse 19, he came from the line of Cain. Then Lamech took for himself 2 wives. The name of one was Ada, and the name of the second was Zillah. And Ada bore Jabal. He was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all those who play the harp and flute. And as for Zillah, she also bore Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every craftsman in bronze and iron. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. Then Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, "Hear my voice, wives of Lamech. Listen to my speech. For I have killed a man for wounding me, even a young man for hurting me. If Cain shall be avenged 7-fold, then Lamech 77-fold." So my first time reading this, I asked myself, why? Why is this story even in the Bible? You've got this line of Cain that would have died off with the flood. I think God is kind of trying to give us some feel of what was going on in society at that time. Because Lamech was a tyrant. And we can see this pretty clearly, that he was an extremely powerful man. We can see this in his own family's accomplishments. You've got the teacher of bronze and ironworking. You've got kind of this father of animal husbandry. You've got this discovery of flutes and harps and how you can use them to make music. Anybody that knows history or maybe even played some sort of empire-building game would know that war, food and growth, entertainment, that is how you build an empire. That's how you consolidate power and how you get people to follow you. And he had all of those. The other nations at the time, if there were other nations, wouldn't have really been able to compete very easily with him. And then we can see his tyranny in his own words. I have killed a man who attacked me, a young man who wounded me. If someone who kills Cain is punished 77 times, then one who kills me will be punished 77 times. This is an evil dude, an evil, powerful guy. And God highlights his story in Genesis 4 to kind of show what was going on. Now we're going to move on to the deception of the sons of God. Genesis 6, verse 1, Now it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, for all whom they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. So these people are kind of distinguished from normal men. They're called sons of God. And it's not real clear exactly what that means in terms of where they came from. But they were clearly wicked, evil people that were at the very least, under the influence of Satan and his demons. And they seem to be powerful, at least in some ways, in that they were giants, and they were called men of renown. Seems like they have kind of special capabilities that may be beyond just a normal human. And despite all of their wickedness, society celebrated them. They were loved by society. And in this, God is bemoaning the lifespan of men. These long lives are just leading to more and more wickedness. You've got these powerful leaders. You've got these heroes, wicked heroes, that could have lived hundreds of years. And it just created a cycle of evil that never got a refresh. And God kind of puts in the sand right here that I'm going to limit man's life to 120 years. And we can see that it didn't happen right away. God didn't make that happen right away, as if you follow the genealogies in Genesis. But by the time you reach Joseph, who lived to be 110, and Moses, who lived to be 120, it seems as if God had made this play out. So God saw, Genesis 6, verse 5, Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. So the Lord said, I will destroy man, whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping thing, and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. And later, we already read this, but it says, again, a kind of an emphasis that God is seeing what's going on. So God looked upon the earth, and indeed it was corrupt. So God allowed these things to happen And for somebody who was righteous like Noah, he would have been like, why? Why, God, are you allowing this? Do you not see what's going on? But clearly, God saw the evil that was going on. But not only that, he saw the righteousness in Noah. God separated. Genesis 7, verse 1. Then the Lord said to Noah, "Come into the ark, you and all your household, because I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. You shall take with you 7 each of every clean animal, a male and his female, 2 each of animals that are unclean, a male and his female. Also 7 each of birds of the air, male and female, to keep the species alive on the face of all the earth." So God separated Noah. And how he separated Noah was through this vessel, this ark that Noah and his family went on to. But God didn't only separate Noah. It says that he separated the animals. And this is sometimes what we think of when we think of the Noah story, all these animals getting onto this ark. And we went to the ark, I guess it would have been 3 years ago now that's out in Kentucky. And there's just all kinds of complicated aspects that you don't even think of about having all these animals on this ark. But God separated Noah, and he separated these animals. But he not only separated them, he made a distinction between them, between the clean and the unclean animals. And he said that there will be 7 of these clean animals that people are made for people to eat. God makes a distinction between quite a few things early on in the Bible. We can see even in just the creation story, God made a distinction between the days, where he rested on the 7th day, and it says that he sanctified it. So God made a distinction between these animals, he made a distinction between the days, and he makes a distinction between people. And what he looks at is good and evil, righteous and wickedness. And he separates them. God saved. Genesis 7, verse 21. "And all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds and cattle and beasts, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, and every man, all in whose nostrils was the breath of the Spirit of life, all that was on the dry land died. So he destroyed all living things which were on the face of the ground, both man and cattle, creeping thing and bird of the air. They were destroyed from the earth. Only Noah and those who were with him in the ark remained alive, and the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days." In many ways, Noah's physical salvation is comparable to our own spiritual salvation. Noah was a righteous man. God saw that righteousness. He separated him out because of it, and he saved him. So in some ways, the byproduct of righteousness is salvation. But ultimately, God is the one that saves, not our own righteousness. Our righteousness is the criteria by which God judges and gives his grace. We're going to shift from the time of Noah to the end time events. I'm going to try to go through these fairly quickly, but we can see Abel's in these end time events. We see the martyrs at the fifth seal, whose blood cried out to be redeemed, much like the blood of Abel that cried out to God. We see the two witnesses. It says that when they finish their testimony, the beast that ascends out of the bottomless pit will make war against them, overcome them, and kill them. So again, righteous people that God lets die. They're performing God's will, and God's will is that this is what they do. We can see a corrupt world. We see the tyranny of the beast in Revelation 13, verse 16. It says he causes all. And it says both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, all to receive a mark on their head, on their hand, or on their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast, or the name or the number of his name. So controlling the trade, the tyranny of the beast. We can see the spiritual deception of the false prophet. In Revelation 13, verse 13, it says he performs signs so that he even makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, and it deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs. Kind of seems a little similar to these sons of God that we had heard about in Genesis 6, that this is just not a regular guy. He's got extra power from Satan and his demons. We can see that God sees. It says that the Lamb has 7 eyes in Revelation 5, verse 6. 7 being a number of completeness. So indicating that the Lamb sees everything. He sees everything that's going on now, and he also sees the future as well. God separates. You can see this with the 144,000 in Revelation 7. It says that do not harm the earth, the sea, or the trees till we have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads. So it seems as if there's a mark that God is putting on them to seal them. There's also a separation from those that are evil, those that have received the mark of the beast. It says, and the smoke of their torment ascends forever and ever, and they have no rest day or night, who worship the beast and his image, and whoever receives the mark of his name. So again, God is dealing with people according to these distinctive characteristics. He's putting marks on his sealed, and he's looking at the marks of those that took on the mark of the beast. And we can see a separation at the great white throne judgment. Twice it says, and the dead were judged according to their works. And it says, and they were judged each one according to his works. God is using good and evil to separate people out. And it says, and anyone not found written in the book of life, another form of separation of that good, was cast into the lake of fire. That's where the evil goes. They're not going to be allowed to continue. And God saves. We can kind of see physical protection God is giving those at the end time. With the woman, who we believe to be the church. Then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. So there is a certain amount of protection God is placing on his people. And when I say the church, I mean God's people, those that he have called out and separated. We can see God giving spiritual salvation to those who are in the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is he who has a part in the first resurrection. Over such, the second death has no power. They are saved from that second death. I'm going to kind of shift gears once again. We're going to talk about a random name that we saw in Genesis. Because there are a lot of landmines of controversy in these sections of Scripture that I talked about, and I just don't think it fully addresses this section of Scripture unless you kind of look at these landmines a little bit and how should we deal with these landmines. Genesis 4, verse 22 says, "And as for Zillah, she also bore Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every craftsman in bronze and iron, and the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah." This verse is the summation of any mention of Naamah throughout the Bible. So I believe, and this is a lot of what I'm trying to show here throughout my message today, that Scripture is purposeful. It's very much connected, interconnected with each other in kind of either small sections of Scripture as well as larger portions of Scripture. And it is consistent. So Naamah is a bit of a wrinkle when dealing with that. How is she purposeful? After all, the line of Cain was wiped out during the flood. There's also an inconsistency with Naamah. This sister of Tubal-Cain is named, while the wife of Noah is just unmentioned throughout the Bible, never named. This person that all of mankind essentially descended from is unlisted. So you've got this lack of purpose and this inconsistency that you have to kind of deal with Naamah, and this is something that many people have kind of addressed. Many people believe that Naamah is Noah's wife. I think that was kind of when I went to the Ark in Kentucky. I think they kind of had a piece of that in kind of how they presented things. So this isn't a new thought. And me personally feel that this may have some level of credibility, some level of probability that this is possible. Because there are several correlations. There are several correlations when it comes to Naamah and Noah. Both are ones listed last in these genealogies of both Cain and Seth. They're the last names mentioned. Both have fathers of the same name. They both have fathers named Lamech. They both have similar names. They both use the name of Noah uses the Hebrew letter Nun and Mem. That's the conclusion. That's all that there is to Noah. Nama also has these two letters, as well as a couple of others. Even their meanings of their names are kind of similar. Noah means rest, and Nama means pleasantness. And how a lot of the biblical scholars kind of tend to rationalize Nama's mention here is something I heartily reject. They tend to say, well, the Genesis is just this random composition of fragments that were preserved throughout history. And you can look at the symmetry between Genesis and Revelation, and to me it doesn't seem very random. I dealt with kind of the earlier parts of Revelation, or the mid part of Revelation, and kind of semi-early part of Genesis. But if you look at the latter part of Genesis, the end of Revelation, the end of Genesis, that lines up as well. So there's symmetry to the Bible. You've got these patterns through the Bible. But as you go through this line of reasoning, you'll also have to ask yourself, was this revealed in the Bible? Was it revealed that Nama was Noah's wife? And it wasn't. It's never explicitly stated. There's some level of high probability that you could put on it, but you don't know. It's not a fact. We know that Sarah was Abraham's wife. We know that Enoch walked with God. We don't know what that means necessarily, but we know that. We know that the Sabbath was and is sanctified by God. We know that God hates sin. These are things that we can look at Scripture and pull out exactly. So as we kind of do this reasoning, it's important to distinguish fact from opinion. Fact from highly probable, and highly probable even from possible. These are important distinctions we need to make as we deal with these more complicated pieces of Scripture. Because we don't want to add to Scripture, but at the same time, we want Scripture to live within us. So it's not wrong to have opinions on these things. It's actually important to have opinions on these things. So I have some lessons of Nama. First lesson, and you could say this is a lesson of these chapters in Genesis 4 through 6. God gives us the dots, but we often need to make the connections. We can see this in the prophecies that God gives us. And a lot of times you can't make the connections because they haven't been fulfilled, but some of them you can. We can see this in how Jesus taught his disciples and with his parables. Jesus would give stories, but they had to make the connections with those stories, and it often required looking at other pieces of Scripture to figure out what spiritual implication Jesus was really talking about when he was talking about this field. And we can see this even with the Bereans, as they search Scripture to make the connections between Jesus Christ, the Messiah, and all the stories of him and what was said in the prophets. They just didn't take it at face value. They searched and dug into Scripture. So it's important to make connections. And while making these connections is important, we still need to distinguish between fact and opinion, and even distinguish between the probable and the possible. And I talked about that earlier. And I think it's important to have opinions on these things that maybe aren't clear, and important to look for these connections, because we really should be hungering and thirsting for what the truth is. And some of the formation of these opinions is trying to find what the truth is, get it as close as God gives us. And that's totally fine, but we still need to distinguish. So in conclusion, Scripture is purposeful, connected, and is consistent. And hopefully I was able to show that in today's message. And we can see this in the patterns that we see in how God works with man in Scripture. We can see the patterns of God seeing, separating, and saving so often. And there are many other patterns within the Bible as well. And God gives us the dots, and we really do need to connect them. Look for the answers. But at the same time, we need to distinguish what is fact, what is explicitly stated in the Bible, and what is something that is just highly probable or an opinion.